Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm incredibly grateful to you and the friends who may be watching the replay. Our event took place today, People Helping People, and there was no volume. So I am recording this as we speak. My co-host, Paulette Hallam, was part of that conversation, and it was such a good conversation. I wish she would have been able to hear it, but I hope that you do get some insight just from listening through these slides that I'm going to be sharing here really shortly. For friends that don't know me, my name is Martha. I am the founder and executive director and also advocate, so many roles, through ConnectImpact Hub, which is a nonprofit organization, all voluntarily ran. And today, conversation is on eviction and housing stability. And we're not just looking at the crisis of eviction as a legal process. We want to look behind the curtain. What does the data usually say about why families find themselves on the blink of housing insecurity? How do different states try to step in? And most importantly, how do we stop the eviction cycle before it even starts? How does it affect our health? Today's presentation is strictly for informational and educational purposes to help us understand more of the evictions and how it impacts and what can be done before we get there, and or if we get there, what can we do? Now, to understand why we're spending our valuable time on this topic today, let's look at why housing is so much more than just a roof over our heads. See you at the next slide. Dun, dun, dun. Why evictions matter. We often hear the phrase housing is healthcare, but what does that actually mean? Simply put, home is the anchor for everything else in our lives. When a household faces eviction, it's not just a change of address, it's a massive shockwave. Studies by researchers like Bradford, McLean, and Schwartz show that losing a home directly hurts a person's physical and mental health. It disrupts kids' education, forces people to lose jobs, and creates a level of chronic stress that is hard to recover from. When housing is unstable, everything else collapses. I want you to think about this for a second. How easy is it to keep a steady job or focus on school if you don't know where you're going to sleep tomorrow? If you agree that housing is the absolute baseline of health, type agree in the chat. Let's back this up with some hard numbers to see the true scale of what we're facing nationwide. Evictions by the numbers. In 2025 alone, across the jurisdictions tracked by Princeton Eviction Lab, there were over 1.23 million eviction cases filed. To put that in perspective, that is an average filing rate of about 7.9%. That means roughly 1 out of every 13 renter households in these areas face court-filed displacement in just a single year. These aren't just abstract statistics on a screen. Each one of those filings represents a real family, a packed up life, and a community under strain. So how do families get to this point? Let's break down the most common paths to housing instability. How tenants get displaced. When we look at the research, we see that evictions rarely happen because of a single bad choice. It's almost always a combination of unexpected life events. It usually starts with a sudden financial shock, like losing a job or experiencing a delay in state benefits. I've also seen cases of divorce, a family death, medical condition, and wiping out your entire savings account due to an emergency. Those also happen. Also, we have the mental health aspect that comes into place. When you combine these personal crises with skyrocketing housing costs and low wages, it creates a perfect storm where families are just one minor emergency away from falling behind. Yep. Now that we understand the problem, let's look at how different cities are trying to fix it. We'll start with New York City's unique approach. New York's one-shot deal. New York City has a famous emergency program run by the Human Resource Administration, or HRA, called the one-shot deal. What makes this program unique, it doesn't just help with back rent, it can cover utility bills, security deposits, and even movement expenses. But the absolute most important takeaway here is when people can apply. You do not have to be sitting in a courtroom with an active eviction case to get help. The HRA actively encourages renters to apply the very second they realize they cannot pay. It's all about catching the problem early. I'm curious to know, how many of you have heard of a program like this before? Drop a yes or no in the chat. But even with programs like this, the underlying pressure on New York renters remains incredibly high. Let's look at the data. New York housing data. The numbers here show us why early intervention programs are so desperately needed. In New York, over 51% of all renting households are classified as rent burden. What does that mean? That means that they're spending more than 30% of their hard-earned income just to keep a roof over their heads. These are New Yorkers. When more than half of the city is rent burden, the system is highly fragile. Since 2020, the data that you see here has been tracked from the Legal Service Corporation. Over 929,000 eviction filings in the civil courts. It shows that emergency grants are just not nice to have. They are critical shields keeping thousands of families afloat. Think about that. More than half of all the renters are rent burden. In the chat, what do you think is the biggest hurdle for these families? Is it their wages, not being able to keep up, or simply that rent is just too high? Give me your thoughts. Now let's head over. We're going to cross the country now to California to see a completely different healthcare integrated model. Let's talk about the California CalAIM framework. While New York focuses heavily on direct financial aid, California is trying something incredibly innovative through its Medicaid program, known as CalAIM. Under the CalAIM program, housing is treated as a medical necessity. The program provides navigation support to help vulnerable individuals with several resources locating, such as apartment, housing, shelters, food, transportation, locating a physician or a specialist, finding financial assistance programs. It also helps with security deposits and offers tenancy sustaining services, which basically means counselors who step in to help resolve landlord-tenant disputes. And with that, this brings us to a major structural hurdle that almost every prevention program faces, the 3-day notice requirement. Let's talk about the 3-day notice. If early intervention is so great, why do so many assistance programs across the country make tenants wait until they receive a 3-day notice or an eviction letter before they can get help? It's a massive paradox. Programs do this because funding is highly limited. So they use the notice to ration resources for those in immediate crisis. They need paperwork to satisfy strict grant requirements. But as we saw with NYC one-shot deal, waiting for a crisis is counterproductive. By removing this requirement, we can prevent court filings entirely, save money, and protect the mental health of renters. When we successfully prevent an eviction, we are just not saving someone's house. We are stabilizing a life. The data proves that housing stability is a powerful medicine. It dramatically improves both physical and mental health. It reduces expensive emergency room visits, psychiatric crisis. It gives people the stable foundation they need to keep their jobs, and allows continuous healthcare access. In short, preventing eviction is one of the most effective public health interventions we have. And with that, I also want to share that this presentation was inspired by a veteran who was facing housing insecurities. And this case in particular, they had they were actually not facing an eviction and also didn't have a 3-day notice. They were short on funding to pay their rent for 1 month due to cutbacks in hours in the workplace. Because of that, it then started causing health issues to arise, and also eventually a 3-day notice was provided. We also heavily contacted several organizations to get support. And what we found was that no organization was willing to provide any funding support unless there was a 3-day notice. So imagine that, someone being put through this area of stress, anxiety, depression, and then get the 3-day notice and then still not know if A, B, C, D, E organizations are even going to be able to help. This is a crisis. This is a huge issue across the US, and it needs more attention. More attention, as well as how can, if folks are already in programs, how can these programs support them maintain long-term housing, especially if they're facing disabilities? How can we get them to apply for government assistance programs, getting qualified so that they can have a steady income or Social Security benefits? There are so many great areas, and these conversations are only going to continue to get harder and harder. And I hope that you are finding them insightful. And if you have any resources that you know of on a national level and you'd like to share, please send them our way. If there's something that you'd like us to research on, a specific topic, send it our way. I want to thank you all so very much for connecting with us, and also Paulette Hallam, who was a huge part of today's presentation. And it is on YouTube and on LinkedIn, so do check it out. And again, apologize for the text, but I hope you were able to get some insight